It's time for the Science Cafe!
Learn about the latest technologic innovations today.
And you don't have to pay.
Expert panels with advanced degrees are sure to satisfy your curiosity.
Since we mention it's free.
And if you think you'll find a better time than this, then come on down and test your hypothesis. Cause you're gonna learn a lot if you wanna stay down at the Science Cafe.
Tim and Lance, I'd like you, instead of the audience to ask questions, to ask some questions of the other panelists for a couple minutes while we pass the bucket, and then we'll go back to the audience.
I have one about digital forensics, and this is a question that we get a lot because Maura Murray went missing in 2004, and we know that the police have her hard drive or have her computer, and then I think gave the actual shell of the computer back, but held onto the hard drive. And so we've kind of inquired about what was on there and if we could help, because we were contacted by some outside digital forensics people who wanted to help. But so I guess my question is, what could have been there from 2004?
2004, you would have seen, the common apps you would have seen. You're not going to see your social media like you saw now. You're going to see the beginning of webmail. And that type of stuff, as far as what you're going to look for communications, and then even back to the late 1990s, were the beginning of your instant messaging apps, your AOL, IM, and all that kind of stuff. So those are the kind of things that I would think that they might be looking for as far as communications, emails, instant messaging type stuff. The early days of that. But as far as talk about the evidence itself, that's pretty common. That they would have maintained the hard drive as the original evidence. The rest of the computer at this point in time really doesn't matter. It's the data on the hard drive that matters. Right. So those are the type of things that you would look for. But again, it depends on what she's doing. Was she a regular user? Did she have webmail accounts? Did she have instant messaging accounts?
Yeah, she had instant messenger, and she had done some searches about some locations to stay at. And so that's kind of really all we know. But I guess, would the police have been able to get into all her email and instant messages? And how do you even do that? So yes, especially back with the technology then too. Obviously hard drives were a lot smaller then. So the way the magnetic hard drives would work. Is that when you delete a file here, when you delete something, it's really not deleted. With a magnetic hard drive, that's really true, because all that's happening, especially with a Windows computer, which I'm going to assume it was a PC. Yeah. Okay. With a Windows computer, pretty much it deletes. If you think about a table of contents in a book, and it says, hey, chapter 1, go to this page. Pretty much it deletes that pointer to wherever the data is, but the data still resides there on the hard drive until something else is written over it. So as far as recovering that data, that's a pretty simple process forensically. There certainly wouldn't have been any encryption or anything like that at the time, but with smaller hard drives, you would see data overwritten more frequently. Now we have 500 1 terabyte, 500 gigabyte, 1 terabyte or larger hard drives all the time. So with magnetic hard drives, that's going to kind of stay there really long, because there's plenty of hard drive to write to. Not so much in 2004. So as stuff was written over, you'd lose that data forensically. So that could be a reason why some older things might not have been located too.
Yeah. I have a two-part question, starting with Dr. Karagosian. We look into Brianna Maitland's disappearance, and we know that there were some samples taken from her car, and her car had, we weren't specifically told what it was, but there was possible DNA samples taken from the seat of the car. So I guess, how long would it have to go if someone were to go re-evaluate something to look for some samples, and then what do you do with that after? So I guess whoever else could answer the second part of the question, is there a period of time where you could say this is just too old to look at? And then if it's not, where does it go from there? Do you identify people? Are they brought in for questioning at that point?
Most of, if not all, the evidence I'm collecting is coming directly from the human body. And because, as human beings, we do things like showering, etc., there's a timeline that we are asked to work within for evidence collection. I'm not as familiar with what timelines are applied to something like the surface of a car seat, but presumably if the environment was protected and not interfered with, then I'm presuming you could probably get DNA for quite some time. I would have to defer to. I will defer.
Yeah, so from a crime scene processing perspective, it depends on what type of exposure, that whatever you're going back to process has been exposed to. So if it's a vehicle, if it's parked inside, if it's been in a garage, been environmentally controlled, and it's been relatively well maintained, there's not any broken glass where the elements are coming in, you're gonna have a much better chance of recovering something like that. DNA evidence certainly can degrade over time. So if it's DNA evidence you're looking for, bodily fluids, blood, the more time that passes, the less chance you have of recovering something that you're going to be able to get a profile off of. But if it's something like hairs or fibers, something like that that you're looking for, and that's not being disturbed, you're going to have a much better chance of recovering that regardless of the amount of time that's passed.
So if you were to recover something, is it within the law to, and you were to identify somebody, is it within the law to bring someone in to question them?
So, it all depends on what type of case it is. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right to a homicide investigation. There's no statute of limitations. So if new information is developed, certainly an investigation is going to go forward in whatever manner is going to be best. It may not be prudent right off the bat to go and bring somebody in, but it depends on where the testing of that evidence leads you to as far as the next steps in the investigation. But certainly for an open investigation, you're going to go in and proceed in whatever manner is best.
This is a follow-up to the first question or one of the first questions from the gentleman over there who talked about Maura's case and when the FBI could get involved, and our very preliminary knowledge of it is that, and I think you said it, is that it needs to cross state lines. Maura's case wasn't a homicide. She's still missing. If they were to find something, she was from Massachusetts, missing in New Hampshire, A, does that qualify? And B, if they were to find something like her cell phone in, say, Vermont, would that be a qualification for the FBI to get involved?
Again, I don't know much about the case. I know nothing about the case, but I would guess it would. But again, it comes down to who's the primary investigator. Like if Nashua PD is investigating a homicide, Nashua PD is going to run with that, or the state police is going to run with one in, say, Andover, New Hampshire. If they get to the point where they ask for our assistance, we'll step in. But we won't go into Nashua PD's territory and start investigating homicides and overlap our work. We work together every week, pretty much every day. We're on the phone with each other on other cases, and it's not a homicide. But let me give you an example of a case I had in Miami that for the interstate nexus, and it'll be a very simple case for you. So Calle Ocho, the bunch of little seedy motels down in the Hialeah area, right? You can rent those things for dirt cheap. They were getting hit by two cousins, the Rodriguez brothers, when I first got down there working violent crime. And they weren't getting a lot of money. They're getting $250, $500 a hit. They maybe hit 8 of them. But it was, Calle Ocho, it changes jurisdictions every mile, right? You got city of Miami, then you have Miami-Dade, then you have Hialeah. And so all these jurisdictions were working these separate armed robberies. The key thing here is a gun was used, right? So they came to us. Normally, the local PD will handle the robberies in-house. But in this case, they came to us asking for our help. We had to find a way to get into that case. And we went with what's called a Hobbs Act. It's the interference with interstate commerce. And it may sound crazy to you, but what was our nexus to interstate commerce? So all these little mom and pop motels, like a bunch of you guys would be like from Nashua, maybe like these motels are like Lillian's and Country Barn, okay? They're not the Hampton Inn, all right? But in the front lobby of these places, they have a Coke machine. And guess what? Coca-Cola is bottled in Atlanta, Georgia. So our nexus they went with it was these guys robbing these stores are taking money away from the business. That money that they're taking, some portion of it, maybe only $5, but some portion of it goes to buy Coca-Cola products to stock that machine. So now they don't have that money to buy product manufactured in Atlanta, Georgia. They're interfering with interstate commerce. Get that? You follow me there? But here's where it gets good. Why they wanted the feds to do this case, because on a Hobbs Act violation on a case like this, first violation is mandatory 5 years. Every subsequent violation is a minimum mandatory 20 years. To run, they can't run concurrent. They have to be consecutive. So these guys do 6 robberies. The minimum mandatory going to trial if they're found guilty is 105 years federal time for a grand total of $3,000. So that's the way we did that case. That was our interstate nexus on that case, because we could show that Coca-Cola is manufactured in Georgia and the candy bars sold in the machine were Hershey's manufactured in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Something like that is where we could, show interstate nexus. And we don't know. We go get an invoice from the owner saying, show me some invoices of stuff you're buying, the beer can you have. If you look at it, it's probably not bottled in New Hampshire, right? Budweiser's, well, that will be here, right? But yeah, go get. I just take some pictures of Coors Light in the cooler, or whatever it may be. That's our interstate nexus. If the local PD needs our help, we're more than willing to help them out. But for us to take a case like we have to show that interstate nexus.
Hi, so we've talked a lot about cold cases. Can you guys describe what actually makes a case become cold? And have any of you actually worked on a case that's become cold? And what emotional effect that's had on you knowing that it hasn't been solved?
The only cold case I've worked on is the one that I got reassigned in 2015. That was the 1988 one. So it was definitely nice to see closure for the family, although I wasn't there at the very beginning. There was a lot of work done up to that point. So I ended up going to Canada a few times for the trip and got to meet the family. There wasn't many living relatives left for this family, unfortunately. But it was definitely a good, profound effect to see closure for them this past summer for both defendants. Really, any case that goes unsolved for more than a year, it's technically a cold case, if you will. That's not one we would consider to be a cold case right off the bat. It's more as the years go by. And unfortunately, we talked about prioritizing earlier. You do have to prioritize the ones that are right to the forefront. You have suspects, you have evidence, and different leads to it. And the cold case unit that the Attorney General's office had started up, that's fairly new, involving a lot of other police departments. So they're starting to do cold case seminars and things like that to get other PDs involved. You can present a case that you think is worthwhile to move up the, prioritizing board, if you will. I think over the next few years with all these developments, I did hear about the ancestry on a podcast. I can't remember which one. The legality of that will become an issue just because it's all like public forum stuff that you can just grab and keep going. And you're kind of violating privacy by keep going down the line and getting to where you want to be. So there will be some issues with that. I'm curious to see how, if anyone uses it actually for a case.
We have 2 different types of cases on our side of the house, right? We have criminal cases, which have a statute of limitation. So a clock is ticking right from the get-go. And then, you try to follow up every lead. Honestly, on our side of the house or in the FBI, the cases take years to develop, some of them. And have I been given some cold cases? Yeah. But what happens is, you're the new guy, reporting for your first day in the office, right? Everybody that's been there for a period of time that has that dog case or two that doesn't want to do anything with it anymore, they transfer to you the day that you get there, right? But that's just the way it is. And then we have national security cases that have no statute of limitation, right? They can run infinite, time. I can tell you, like I had one cold case on a bank robbery, which every single lead had been followed up on when I first got to Miami. They had a subject identified, but he had disappeared. One of the 2 witnesses was dead. It was just find this guy and interview him. Why it wasn't done, 3 years before, I have no idea. When it went, basically inactive. But this inactive case for 3 years gets dropped on my desk. My first report to Miami, I end up finding this guy. Um, I have nothing really, right? So you just have to rely on your wit, maybe a little bit of guilt. So I found him and talking to him. Obviously, he denies it. He knows I have nothing. If I had anything or the FBI had anything, we would have arrested him 3 years ago. Luckily for me, I noticed he had the cross around his neck, so I kind of played on his guilt and said, it's not my money. You'll answer to the man upstairs someday, anyways, and any punishment the judge gives you will pale in comparison to what you're going to face up there. And I just walked away, figuring I'd write off the case and close it because I had nothing else I could possibly do on that case. And then the next day, the guy calls me up. He couldn't live with his guilt. Now, this is a long-term criminal. He had like at least 30 arrests on his record. And he called me up. He's a changed man. Went over there, and he admitted to doing the bank robbery. So I asked him to write out his confession. Obviously, he didn't feel comfortable doing it in English. He was a Cuban gentleman. So he asked if he could go home in the comfort of his own home and write out his confession with his wife, which I allowed him to do. I told him, hey, look, and again, the FBI, the big difference for me going from Nashua to the FBI is, unless it's a real rare occasion, I am not going to be putting cuffs on somebody unless I already have a warrant or an indictment for that person, okay? I can't just walk down the street, hey, you're doing something wrong, and cuff them, unless it's, a bank robbery right in front of me. So in this case, a robbery that happened, 4 years before I ever got there, I walk away from him, I tell him, okay, I'm going to file a report and we'll indict you. So this is your opportunity to tell the judge what you did, why you did it, without having to get on the stand. He bought it, went home, wrote a 5-6 page handwritten confession in Spanish, gave it to me the next day, and we went into court, and even the judge is like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And his defense attorney, just threw her hands up, and he pled guilty. And but it worked out, right? I was taught a long time ago by a relative that had been a police officer in the family. You catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. So I was nice to the guy, polite to him. He did his federal time. He comes out. He's on parole, and he gets a job in the docks of Miami. Well, guess what? Tankers come in, or a freighter, and it's got like 375 kilos of cocaine stuck in the Chiquita bananas. Now, I don't work drugs, but this guy thought I treated him right, a few years back. So he calls me up and says, Mr. Mark, this is so-and-so. You remember me? I said, oh, yeah, because even though we were opposite sides, we, got along. And he says, tonight, Dock 13, 375 kilos in the Chiquita bananas. He goes, you were nice to me. I owe you one. So I called down to the drug guys. I said, you got a load coming in tonight. And they hit it, and there it was. But that's a cold case, right? So it all started from a cold case and rolled into something good.
The only reason I'm doing this is because you brought it up. What happened to the drugs in the Chiquita bananas?
We seize it, and eventually it gets burned. I mean, again, not to knock Nashua. I love being back here, guys, but it's a big culture shock, Nashua to Miami, right? My first case down there, another one in the bank robbery squad. You catch a guy doing a bank robbery. He's got the gun with the serial numbers drilled out in a search warrant. Search his apartment. He's got 3 kilos of cocaine in his bedroom. I think I hit the mother load. I go to the U.S. Attorney's office, and they're like, no, we're not touching that cocaine deal. It will look like we're piling on. We'll do the bank robbery, we'll do the gun with the serial numbers drilled out. We're letting the cocaine just walk with no charges. In New Hampshire, man, 3 kilos of cocaine would be a good grab. And they're like, you stick around Miami long enough, kid, you'll see big grabs. And then I go, okay, a few years later, I get to 375 kilos. And then there was a case down there on the drug side called Falcone and Magluta. I think they made a movie out of Falcon the Snowman. And we searched one of their homes, and one of the informants told us that there was some cash buried in the backyard, like hard cash. And took a backhoe and dug it up, and it was $18 million cash stuck in boxes in the backyard. So in that case, we have to get an armored car to come to the location. We have to put 2 FBI agents in the back. By the time we got all this stuff put together, obviously the Federal Reserve in Miami was closed. So we had to drive the armored car to the Miami office, lock it under, inside the garage with FBI agents overnight until the next morning when the Federal Reserve opened. They take you back over there and through the money counting machines.
What is the latest thing going on in the Maura Murray case? Has there been any movement?
Well, okay, so what we know about her case right now is there's this new lead that's out there that they're working with law enforcement on. The family there was a location that was given to the family way back in 2000, I think in 2004, that they weren't able to access because of the owners of the property. It's been a public statement from the Attorney General office that they did search that location once they were given access to it a couple of times with cadaver dogs, and they don't say anything specific other than there was nothing there. They found nothing there. Now that's not to say that cadaver dogs could hit on one day and not hit on another day. It really, especially after so long, it does depend on the conditions of that particular day. We know that they took ground penetrating radar there, and there was an anomaly, and that's where we're at now. So that's probably the most significant movement that's happened. For what Tim and I have been doing, we've been able to rule out a lot of the rumored places. There's been 2 or 3 rumored places that have just been buzzing in the community and amongst the people who follow the case, and we were able to rule out those places by going there and actually doing ground penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and not coming up with anything.
DNA is such a powerful tool in crime solving. Will they become routine, like fingerprints, regardless of the crime, to be taken when somebody is arrested?
Speaking on behalf of us, my agency, when you get arrested federally, we do take DNA swabs, and then at the U.S. Marshal's office, in addition to the fingerprints, and immediately mail them to I think it's Clarksburg, West Virginia, where they're all maintained.
Locally, certainly, we take fingerprints now upon arrest. We do not take DNA. For felony convictions, DNA is collected, particularly in the sex offenders and that type of stuff. So those will go into the same CODIS database that Mark's DNA will go into. Not Mark's DNA, but you know. But those will go into the national repository for that. So if it's going to be a permanent change, I don't know if that's something that's in the works at all, but it's not going to be changing anytime soon, I think, for the way we do business locally.
Do you take evidence that you couldn't get into later, knowing that technology will change and you might be able to access it in the future, or is it kind of, I don't want to say discarded, but like kind of like thrown into like those zero files?
No, that's a great question. No, we certainly with digital evidence, the digital evidence landscape is changing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. There's new phones, new devices, that kind of stuff coming out all the time. And with things like encryption, there's always new types of encryption coming out, and new methods to deploy encryption on devices. And then a few months later, there's a commercial company out there that's figuring out a way to to find an exploit that we can break that encryption or get into a certain device. So we will. If a device that we have in evidence during the course of a case, we find that we weren't able to get into it in the first place, and some new technology is now available to us that we can examine and extract that data, we will certainly we will do that. But there's not any cases that come to mind right now. We're specifically holding on to evidence, waiting for new technology, but we're on the lookout for that where it might be beneficial to us. So we certainly have done that in the past. One example I could think of off the top of my head, we did have a sexual assault case where messages were exchanged with the suspect. The suspect's iOS Apple device was locked, and we were unable to get into it here. A number of months had passed, and technology became available to us. We were able to then get into it, and we were able to find the evidence on there that implicated the suspect in a sexual assault. So we certainly will use it if we can. We're not specifically holding on to it, hoping for it to break, though.
It sounds like you guys are handling a lot of digital forensics on the local level at the Nashua PD. Is there kind of like a line where there's a limit to your capabilities, and what point do you hand it off to FBI or state or federal
So we're actually we're very very fortunate here in Nashua to have resources, to have our own computer forensic unit. There's a number of agencies throughout the state that work in conjunction with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force that have some awesome forensic examiners at their agencies, and the forensic work is spread throughout the state to those agencies and to the state police lab as well for forensics. And if there's something that we can't work on locally, unless it's a significant homicide case or something like that, we're typically not farming out a lot of the work to any other agencies. We did have one child exploitation case, and in the past 2 years where the hard drive failed. We were able to reach out to our partners in the Secret Service and send it away to them for some assistance. Repairing a broken drive, those are capabilities we don't have here locally, and we were able to get that back and work with them. But other than few and far between examples like that, there's no national security investigations that we're working on here or anything like that we're going to need to really leverage some of those high technologies that these guys have access to that we don't.
On the national security side of the house, in order to work those cases, you have to have a security clearance. We are diligently trying to increase the amount of people that have security clearances at the local level so that they can get briefed in on these things. Nashua probably has the most officers in the state that have security clearances or are going through the process for a security clearance right now, which allows them to come to meetings and hear what's going on. And, some of these forensic stuff is discussed in there, right? Because bad guys talk on these type of things. So there are some people, some detectives or whatnot in the Nashua Police Department or high-ranking people that are briefed on these things. They sit in the meetings. And if things are going on inside whatever town it is, we try to let who we can know what's going on, right? So if there's someone in that particular department that has a security clearance, we will go to them and say, hey, just so you know, we're in your neighborhood, or we're going to be in your town, because and I tease their administration all the time because I know what wearing the suits like every day over there. If you guys see me on the street, you probably will, right? This is how it's going to work every day. I can guarantee you run into me somewhere, you're not going to think it's the FBI, right? So if I'm sitting in a neighborhood on a house, I can't tell you how many times me or some of the people I work with are getting called into the locals, and they're rolling up and they're like, what are you doing? And it doesn't go well sometimes, right? I wish I could tell you, but I can't. But, do you want to call Lieutenant Allard over at the PD? Because Lieutenant Allard has a security clearance. Or you want to call Deputy Chief Kerrigan or Chief Lavoie because they have the security clearance. They'll know that we're in town, but they're not going to go downstairs and tell everybody. So, and as far as the forensics go, Nashua's got their stuff together, right? But there are some small police departments in parts of the state that I covered that have absolutely no resources. It's maybe a chief and a part-timer. So that's where we spend a lot of time up in the North Country, out in the western part of the state, helping those individuals get the tools or the services that they need.
Okay, question down front.
I just assume from Mark down, you've had education in profiling. You all have to be involved in that in order to
Me personally, I don't want to speak for Pat too. We haven't had any specific training on profiling. Like Pat talked about a minute ago, it's about how we treat people and how we talk to people. One of the most important skills for detectives in general to have, and it's a skill that we push with our detectives in the National Police Department, is really have solid interview skills. That's the biggest foundation to being a good investigator, is being able to talk to people. You got to be able to sell the ketchup popsicle to the woman in white gloves, right? So that's the most important skill to have as far as being an investigator. But as far as profiling people or building profiles based on certain traits or characteristics, that's not something we do every day on a day in day out basis. But we do it to a degree, but not not an official thing like you see on TV, like the FBI going out and building a profile on a criminal. But we're certainly looking at all the aspects of a crime or an event and figuring out, okay, what type of people are going to do this, but not like BAU or anything like that in Criminal Minds.
I would just send a lead down to Quantico. That's what BAU, this Behavioral Analysis Unit, is based. And those are agents that spend some time in the field. They have some sort of background or degrees in mental health type stuff, typically. And it's a competitive process to get in there. That's a supervisor's position to be there. All of them are supervisors. And we'll send leads down to them, and they'll build up the profile for them. Myself, kind of tough on Nashua PD, but right before I left Nashua PD, they invested a little bit of money in me, and they sent me to polygraph school. So in part of polygraph school, you learn interview and interrogation, a little bit more in depth. So that's actually helped me through my FBI career.
Did you pass?
I passed, but the chief was not happy that I left like 6 months later.
My question is, so far we've talked about people that have, the victim, their identification. Are there any victims that have not been identified, and have you utilized, what resources do you utilize to try to find out their identification, through their dental records, or I don't know what else?
I don't think there's anything that we have right now that that we're looking to identify any victims on. I can speak a little bit more broadly. We talk about child exploitation online. One of the things we look at is is that the child exploitation imagery and that kind of stuff, and a lot of those images we run them through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to see if they've been identified in the images, to tell how old they are, let them know, see if they're victims of abuse, to what degree they're victims of abuse, and if they haven't been located, try and find them. So when it comes to identifying those victims, if we have unidentified children in those images, those will be sent off to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for possible identification. Those leads will get farmed out to a number of different federal agencies that work on identifying those victims. And a lot of the ways they do that, just real quick, they look at the backgrounds in the images. So if there's a TV on in the background of a video, or the carpeting in the hotel room floor, or the pattern on sheets or drapes, doorknobs, like all those little tiny things that you don't think about, that you see in the backgrounds of pictures, a certain type of water bottle or a certain brand of beer that's in the background. Where is it brewed? Where is it sold? All those types of things. So those things are done in those type of child exploitation investigations to identify unknown victims.
We do a lot of that internationally. So, it's common knowledge within our organization, but probably not for the general public, is 4 offices of the FBI have extraterritorial responsibilities, meaning we're responsible for investigations outside the U.S. in a certain geographic region that may have U.S. victims. Natalie Holloway, say, in Aruba, right? A lot of you guys know that. So the 4 offices are New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, and L.A. L.A. covers Asia and that side of the Pacific. Miami covers Central South America and the Caribbean. And then New York and Washington Field divvy up Europe and Africa and the Middle East. As part of being an extraterritorial division, you have what we call, every division has an ERT, Evidence Response Team, but then they have an enhanced team in those divisions where you're ready to deploy within 24 hours. X amount of people are on those teams. When I was in Miami, we had one of the gentlemen that worked for me, Scott Hahn. He was, prior to joining the FBI, believe it or not, a dentist practicing in Atlanta, Georgia. And he decided to join the FBI. Scott's specialty was going to mass graves around the world for genocide crimes and doing the dental forensics and those type of things. So victims who we don't know, and trying to identify them through whatever teeth implants he could get, or pulling the DNA out of the bones. That was Scott's specialty, and he was a licensed doctor.
All right, well, we're just about out of time, so please join me in thanking this exceptional panel. So, next month we'll be here again.